Welcome to Consider the Source Conversations. I'm Jennifer Rhodes, and I'm delighted to be joined today by director and designer James Darrah, who is directing the world premiere of John Corigliano and Mark Adamo's The Lord of Cries. Welcome, James.
Thank you.
Let's just start at the beginning. What were your early experiences with opera like? Do you have any memories that stand out?
Kind of. I have to admit, I came to it pretty late. So I didn't really get involved in opera until after college, and it was something that I was introduced to, and then I remember watching some archival productions on DVDs and sort of becoming familiar with some of the rep and studying music and really kind of delving into it, I would say, after I had spent more time in theater. So I had wanted to be an actor and was spending time with classics and Greek plays and Shakespeare, and I kind of found my way to opera through that, actually.
That's interesting. Were there works of opera that started to stand out in terms of catching your attention as it sort of articulating some part of the theatrical process that seemed interesting to you?
Yeah, I mean, I remember one of the earliest things was I saw a DVD actually of the there was an amazing production Michael Levine and Robert Carson had done with Renee Fleming, a production of Rusalka in Paris, and there's a really great archival DVD of that production, and it's so beautiful design wise, it really has a cohesive vision directorially, but certainly the actual aestheticism of the design really contained the story in this kind of fresh, exciting way. And for me, like as a theater person, I had always thought of opera as this kind of really staid, stuffy, outdated, boring, dramatically inept thing. And then I watched that DVD and was like completely floored and moved and thought it was so so beautiful and so exciting, and that was just on tape. And so I thought, okay, I have to go see something live and see it. And that's kind of when you realize that opera is a super old art form that has a massive amount of material. So you're kind of, it's like beyond just trying to decide what to watch on a streaming platform. It's like that times 10. You kind of have to figure out what it is, and just I think because the Rusalka was kind of the first exposure I had to something just creatively, even though that's, I would say, not an obscure piece, but it's certainly not Mare de Figaro or La Boheme. Like I started listening to Handel's operas because I had really loved mythology, and I had these kind of like weird detours into opera that I somehow didn't really learn or initially know much about. I would say that the top 20 operas that are performed all over the world, was not really my access point. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have like a family member that had ever taken me or loved it, or, I didn't have any of that instilled in who I was.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the first show, the first show you saw live?
I don't. I remember going to, I think, a Cendrillon or something as a student. Mm-hmm. Maybe a matinee in St. Louis. It would have been Opera Theater St. Louis. I grew up outside St. Louis, Missouri, but I don't remember as an adult. I think I did go. I saw a lot of things at LA Opera. I saw like Robert Wilson did Madame Butterfly there, and the first time they did that was probably one of the first like large proscenium operas that I saw.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to think about what those access points look like, and that how that shapes your vision of what it can be. That if you're experiencing it in multiple formats, both filmed and live, then it sort of seems like it might enlarge your idea of what could the possibilities be.
Yeah.
What do you think opera does especially well as a form?
Excess.
Is there a particular production or a moment in any show?
No, just by nature of what it is. I feel like it really does. Opera is very extra. It's like opera's ready to just, it's like, oh, she catches on fire and like, burns up, and then the whole world comes crashing down. Like, sure, orchestrate that and we'll do that. Okay, like figure out how to put that on stage, and it's like if you actually kind of read some of Handel's early operas, you're like, oh, these are really dark and twisted and like full of, like I always feel like opera is full of really insane people, just sort of, I mean, that sounds so reductive. I guess what I mean is just like, there's an unnatural quality to it that I really actually think is helpful in the art making. Like there's this ability at its best. Even, you know, I admittedly have to say, like, even though I don't really work in standard rep or this, you know, the times that you watch like a really great, like just genuine, like mid-century voice delivering traditional show, or even like a Zeffirelli show full of excess, you know, there's something massively thrilling about that. Sound world wise, like the way the orchestra hits you, the way a voice can hit you, you know. I feel like I read about these singers that, you know, become very famous, and you always read about what their first role was, you know, some critic or an opera lover or a head of a company, you know, went to some festival and heard some 23-year-old, you know, baby dramatic soprano, and that person, you know, and delivers this incredible performance. And I feel like that electricity is really excessive. There's a massive quality to it that is really done well. Opera knows how to serve that up on a really big tray.
Yeah, I mean, in this year in which, you know, we've been away from many live performances, like it seems interesting to think about, like, what is it that you know, draws people in so strongly about this form. And yeah, I mean, I kind of landed on, just for myself, the artificiality, and that seems like that kind of, it's interesting to think about being drawn to that, but that seems to be how
well, I always tell, like, I teach I teach in the theater school and the music school at UCLA, and in the music school I do like performance and acting courses for opera singers, and I'm always saying, like, you're singing the whole time. Like, we've left reality behind a long time ago. You know, if they're like, well, that doesn't feel real, I'm like, but you're also powering your voice over like 70 people playing instruments. Like, the nature of the bargain that you've made to lie to us for 2 hours is there. So, like, let's make something cool with that and leave that behind. And it's funny, I feel like that's still something opera wrestles with today, because you have, you know, other more popular forms of media and film and television and things that aren't without expressionism and surrealism and everything that I feel like opera does really well. But there is that sort of quality of history and the all the different, you know, centuries that opera has existed in have totally different sonorities and sounds and dramatic, you know, structures and stories. And I find all of that part of it really fascinating and exciting, you know, that I feel like I really feel strongly, like, you know, dance and film and TV should, like, just borrow a little bit of the DNA of opera. And I feel like opera should borrow a little bit of theirs.
Yeah. What is your process like when you begin conceptualizing a new work?
I really start with, if it's a piece that has been performed and recorded, I like listening to the music and not knowing anything about it, because I also think that that's a really good way to judge, like, where, and I try to be really self-aware of, like, am I bored right now? Do I know what's going on? Like, without even reading it, right? Because I'm thinking, and admittedly, that's probably also because I'm one of those people that, like, I don't really like reading like super titles. I kind of like to see, if I don't know something, there's always a moment where in a rehearsal process, I kind of like to, like, not read them or not look and see, you know, what is what we're feeling, and musically, emotionally, or impact wise, what is it telling us about the story, and is the story clear, right? You should be able to get a clear story from staging and blocking and relationships and color use and everything. Is that communicating something to me? And it will always need text, but I always kind of start more, I would say, with the sound world or the music, or how does it make me, how do I react to that? You know, what does that make me feel like I would be interested in seeing, or what does that world look like? And then with designers, we, you know, have spent a lot of time with the libretto and the text and the music. In the case of Lord of Cries, you know, there's no recording, so we're looking at the score. And actually, my first meeting with John Corigliano, he had already finished it. He handed me the full scores. I, like, left New York with these massive scores of Lord of Cries, because he's just so decisive about what he knew he wanted it to sound like. And that's kind of exciting, because you get that and you open the pages of the score and you're kind of looking at what he's written, what he's orchestrated. You're seeing Mark's libretto in there, and you're kind of seeing how all of those things relate. So that's really the first part. And then we kind of go into this phase with design where it's more about tone than, like, nuts and bolts. Like, we don't sort of ground, you know, we don't really get into the scenic design right away. It's more about the feeling that we want from either colors, or, you know, we look at images, we look at reference images, we try to find things that we can use to incorporate.
What has it been like working on this work with such sort of a rich text background? I mean, it feels like in some ways I was so excited when I first heard this announced, because I thought, yeah, I mean, I feel like Dionysus haunts all of opera. But Dracula, I felt like I actually haven't even read Dracula. Like, I feel like I know what Dracula is, and then reading it was a completely different experience. So these two forces that feel familiar, but are both familiar and unfamiliar. What's it been like working with those? Have there been any interesting revelations about either of the texts while you worked through it?
Yeah, that it's really hard. You know, that it's like that is not an expected mixture, which I think is part of its exciting nature. You know, that it as we dig into it, and Mark Adamo always said, he's like, you know, these two things have a lot more in common than you would think. And I think he even told me, you know, people met that with like, okay, you're doing Dracula as like an opera, like, and I think some of that just comes from the perceptions of that story, the way that's infiltrated pop culture and media, and the way that we think about that. And there's a fine line between that, you know, going toward that sort of cliched mawkishness versus something that feels artful. And I think the sort of Greek theater, Bacchanalia, Dionysus side of it, this sort of base desire, sort of carnal element, feels very operatic. Dracula didn't feel operatic to me. I feel like I had read it in high school, and so I went back and was like, oh, I should look at this again. And I was like, you know, I'm completely blown away by Coppola's film, which has incredible this amazing costume designer, that the visual, the world of that film, like, is very vivid in my mind. So I was like, okay, well, we have to do not anything related to that. And it's Victorian London, but it's not. I mean, there's a lot of challenges in just that mixture, but I feel like it's indicative of what opera does really well too, which is like this mixture of text and music, or staging, you know, voice, and, you know, all of these things that are colliding in opera. I like that the libretto source idea was a collision, right? It wasn't, Mark could have very easily just been like, well, it's an updated Dracula that has a little bit of Greek theater in it. And I'm like, well, it actually, you kind of oscillate between like, okay, this is a retelling of Dracula. Oh wait, no, this is actually a Greek play with like a little spice of Dracula. Or, and, you know, you kind of wrestle with yourself about where that balance falls. And I feel really only the contemporary operas that I've worked on, the world premieres, have that mixture, which I guess feels much more like something that we're more familiar with that in our lives today, right? That the sort of stock characters or tropes or those sort of things, like, if we use them, you know, why? You have to kind of look at a more complicated layering and texturing of storytelling for a modern audience feels exciting to me. Not that something like Bohème doesn't have beautiful music and real characters and can be vivid, but there is something, I think, in this piece, the audacity of combining those has a power to it that we found useful in the process, certainly.
Were there moments when you found, like, yourself kind of, you spoke about of oscillating, but are there moments where there's a kind of, I don't know, I think what Dionysus is so interesting to think about, like contamination. Are there moments of kind of like one world kind of transforming the other, or I don't know, maybe contamination is the wrong word, but like that sort of malleability of worlds?
I don't know. Not, I mean, to be honest, I just like him. So I like Dionysus, you know? So I'm like on his side, like as a trickster. I kind of, you know, I'm kind of like, Victorian London looks kind of boring. Like, he should come in and mess it up, you know? It's like, yeah, like let all these people, like, get them going. Like, let's move on. And I feel like that maybe is a little more contemporary, you know, like we don't have Victorian London ideals anymore. And this sort of staid quality of that period feels like, you know, am excited that the piece kind of dispenses with it very quickly in some ways. You know, that it's much more, Dionysus sort of shows up and is on this path, and the elements of the Bacchae that are in it, you know, that feels very interchangeable related to time period. Like, there's certainly, you read that play, a good translation of that play, and you kind of think, oh, okay, this still has relevance to our own human nature and base desires. And, you know, there's that kind of more, I would say, interior richness in the piece is exciting to me. But I'm sort of team Dionysus, so I don't know if it, I'm like kind of all investing in that, as opposed to like lecturing us, it's like.
No, I mean, I feel like also like getting to come back to the stage with Dionysus on stage feels right in so many ways.
Yeah.
Beyond the text sources, were there any other points of reference in other media that kind of helped inspire your vision for the piece? I know it's still very much,
Kind of. I mean, more of it was just kind of, I would say the trickiest part was thinking about costumes, and Chrissy Carbonides, who I work with a lot, is really good at. She's really good at doing things that I feel like are visionary and very bold and very richly layered, but she's also used to working with actors like on film and TV in this way that is very intimate. And so she kind of had that intimacy without really having, because opera, hasn't really had contact with the singers, which is always bizarre. So we've kind of created these ideas dramaturgically around costumes and how she's chosen fabrics, and kind of created her own time period and world, which I felt like was important, to not just see a whole bunch of what would feel kind of like stuffy Victorian sort of opera garb, or something that feels old-fashioned. I really challenged her to kind of think like, how do you put Dionysus on stage? How do you do something that feels evocative and richly layered just in meaning, but isn't sort of a cliche about, here's Greek theater or whatever it might be. So I would say that's been more of less of an, we weren't necessarily pulling from one single place, but that had a lot of streams of inspiration, looking at historical garments and then modifying them in some way, looking at Victorians menswear and then thinking about how we could pair that with something more modern, or choosing really, more colorful postmodern ideas in fabrics or printed textures and things. We also looked at a lot of Victorian wallpaper. Chrissy had this book about Victorian wallpaper that it had like deadly lethal amounts of arsenic and things in it at times. And so there's this whole book that has all these incredible prints about this wallpaper that was basically really poisonous and toxic during that period of time. And I just thought like, well, that's kind of an amazing metaphor for the whole piece, it's like this thing. And so she actually pulled some of those designs, modified them, and put those into some of the printing on the fabrics. And those are in some of the projection designs, just kind of evoke this sort of like artisan styling of like decor and design that is mutable and changeable and evolves, is kind of interesting.
Wow. I mean, I think everyone is so excited to be back in the theater and to get to see this. Extremely exciting. Are there any small rituals of live theater going that you're particularly looking forward to as things start to come back?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of excited about the idea of being in that sort of theater space, that collective sort of, and Santa Fe, has elements of it that feel like big theater, this sort of outdoor expanse, an expanse of land around you with this kind of focused, both mentally and visually focused time, with something on stage, but also then the acoustic of that and how that reaches you in that close proximity is exciting. I'm out in the desert now filming a sort of TV opera mixture, and we had our first live singing yesterday, and everyone, was kind of like being that close to like an opera singer again in close proximity, even though it's in front of a camera. Like there was something about that was exciting. So I think I'm also just personally looking forward to the rehearsal room. I really like the staging process. I've had to go through this period of really, I would say like, early on when I was working on projects, I always felt like I liked the like room run the best. When it's all like muslin mock-ups and it's all usually in like a white empty space and they're all wearing muslin, and you're close to it and everyone's sitting right there. And so it's kind of loud and forceful. And I'd be like, show's perfect, it's done, that's what it should be. And then you get all the lights and everything and you're like, ah. So I've tried to, I have calmed that part of my brain down that is, you know, like horrified the moment you get into a theater, which I just think is part of artistic process, you know, that it's like, as a director, you kind of learn that no matter how, even dramaturgically, you know, if you're a creator, you always, your creation is guided and shepherded in some way, but at a certain point, it never really is exactly what is lived in your head, right? You're always making it with other people, so there's these other points of view, and I try to talk about that a lot. You know, that I want to feel like my designers feel empowered to add things to what we're doing, and that I trust people, and that it's not, you know, I don't really ever feel like I'm sort of pre-visualizing something and then just spending 2 years just actually making that thing that I thought of in my head, right? There's a whole happenstance discovery process in the room, you know, they're like accidents or things that happen or mistakes, and then those end up being more interesting and you kind of follow those. I'm excited for that. Like, I really like those sort of discoveries that I feel like in the past few years I've been exploring that a little bit more.
James, thank you so much. I can't wait
yeah
tonight.
yeah, it'll be fun.